Weeds never seem to grow where nobody notices them. They don't wait quietly behind the shed. They don't hide in the far corner of the pasture. No, they come up right beside the front walk, through the crack in the driveway, along the edge of the flower bed you just finished mulching, right where every neighbor walking past your house can see them. And if you've ever knelt down with a hand trowel trying to pull one stubborn clump that feels like it's rooted somewhere beneath the county line, you know exactly how frustrating that can be. The first year after I married into an Amish family, I fought weeds the same way most people do. I pulled them. I sprayed them. I pulled them again. Some came back before the week was over. One afternoon I was standing at the end of the driveway, wrestling with a patch of grass growing through a concrete crack. I had already pulled it twice that month. There I was again, sweating, digging, muttering things that probably weren't helping the weeds leave. My father-in-law walked by carrying a bucket. He watched me struggle for a minute before asking, "Are you trying to remove the weed?" I laughed. He nodded. Then he looked at the crack and said something that completely changed how I thought about weeds. At first that sounded almost silly. Grass is beautiful in a lawn. The very same grass pushing through a driveway crack suddenly becomes a nuisance. Wildflowers growing across a meadow look wonderful. Those same flowers taking over your vegetable garden become weeds. The plant isn't the problem. The location is. That may sound like a small difference, but it changes everything. Because once you stop treating every weed the same, you stop reaching for the same solution every time. My father-in-law never believed in one miracle weed killer. He believed in matching the method to the place. He would hand pull weeds in the vegetable garden. He would mulch flower beds. He would edge around the driveway. And for cracks in concrete, gravel paths, or unwanted grass growing where nothing else should grow, he used a simple homemade spray, not because it worked everywhere, because it worked where it belonged. That distinction matters. Before I show you the recipe, let me tell you the biggest mistake people make. They hear homemade weed killer, and suddenly every green thing in the yard looks like a target. Don't do that. This mixture doesn't know the difference between the dandelion you hate and the flower you paid $15 for at the garden center. If it lands on green leaves, it can injure them. Good grass, bad grass, tomatoes, hostas peppers, it doesn't care. That's why my father-in-law never used it in the middle of a healthy lawn. He saved it for places where he wanted everything green gone. Driveway cracks, sidewalk seams, gravel paths, fence lines, small patches of unwanted grass and mulch where nearby plants could be protected. Those were its jobs, not the whole yard. Then he carried me into the workshop and set 3 ordinary items on the bench. A gallon of distilled white vinegar, a container of plain table salt, a small bottle of dish soap. I looked at him. He smiled. The recipe couldn't have been simpler. 1 gallon of distilled white vinegar, 1 cup of ordinary table salt, about half a tablespoon of dish soap, not half a cup, not a big squeeze, just enough to help the liquid spread across the leaves instead of rolling off them. He poured the vinegar into a clean pump sprayer, added the salt, added the small amount of dish soap, closed the lid, then gently rolled the sprayer back and forth until the salt dissolved. No need to shake it like you're making butter, he said. Another small lesson. Gentle usually works better than violent. I asked him why each ingredient mattered. He picked up the vinegar first. The vinegar dries and damages tender green growth. Then he held up the salt. He explained that salt doesn't simply disappear after the weeds turn brown. It stays in the soil for a while. That's one reason he preferred using this spray on concrete cracks and gravel instead of places where he hoped to grow vegetables later. Then he picked up the dish soap. Most folks think the soap kills weeds. It doesn't. Its job is much simpler. Leaves naturally shed water. You can see it after a rainstorm. Tiny droplets beat up and roll away. The soap breaks that surface tension. Instead of beating up, the mixture spreads across the leaf and clings to it. That's all. The vinegar and salt do most of the work. The soap simply helps them stay where they need to be. Simple. Practical. No mystery. Then he handed me a large piece of cardboard. I looked at him. What am I supposed to do with this? Protect the flowers. That piece of cardboard turned out to be one of the smartest tools in the whole process. Instead of spraying carelessly, he placed the cardboard between the weeds and the plants he wanted to keep. Then he sprayed toward the concrete. Not toward the flowers, not toward the crack. It took a little longer, but it saved replacing flowers later. better. Fast work, he said, often becomes slow repair. That sentence followed me the rest of the afternoon. Then he looked up at the trees. No wind. Good. He never sprayed on windy days. Even a light breeze can carry tiny droplets farther than you think. One careless gust is all it takes to brown the edge of your lawn or damage a flower bed. Timing mattered too. He preferred warm, sunny days after the morning dew had dried. If rain was coming in an hour, he waited. If the leaves were still wet, he waited. The spray needs time to stay on the plant and dry. Rain simply washes away your work. Then he surprised me again. He looked at the weeds and said, "These are too tall. I thought bigger weeds needed more spray." He reached for a pair of hand shears. "No, they need less height." He trimmed the weeds first, not down to bare dirt, just enough to expose fresh green growth underneath. Fresh leaves respond better, he explained. If you only wet the old top growth, don't be surprised when the plant comes back. That was another mistake I'd been making for years without realizing it. And we still hadn't sprayed a single weed. Once the weeds had been trimmed, my father-in-law pumped the sprayer a few times. Then he surprised me again. He didn't spray the ground. He sprayed the leaves. Every time I'd used a weed killer before, I'd soaked the whole area, the dirt, the crack, the concrete, everything. He shook his head. That made perfect sense. The spray works by contact. If it doesn't touch the green parts of the plant, it can't do much. Flooding the soil only wastes the mixture. He coated the leaves until they looked wet, not dripping, not running into puddles, just evenly covered. Then he stepped back. I looked at him. He nodded. Waiting was always the hardest part. About 4 hours later, I walked back outside. The leaves had already begun curling. By evening, they looked tired. The next morning, many of them had turned brown. I smiled. He laughed. Then he bent down and pointed at the base of one stubborn clump. 3 days later, little green shoots appeared again. I thought the spray had failed. That became another lesson. This homemade spray is what gardeners often call a burn-down treatment. It damages the leaves and tender green growth it touches. Small annual weeds may disappear completely, but tougher perennial weeds with deep roots, rhizomes, bulbs, or underground storage structures can grow back. The leaves are gone. The roots are still thinking. He explained that some weeds survive because they store energy underground. The spray never reaches that stored energy, so if new shoots appear, don't be surprised. Sometimes a second treatment is needed. Sometimes digging is still the better answer. Again, the right tool for the right job. One weed in a driveway crack, the spray makes good sense. One dandelion in the middle of a healthy lawn, probably not. You'll likely damage the surrounding grass too. That is where many people become disappointed. They expect one homemade recipe to solve every weed problem. My father-in-law never expected that. He expected each method to do one job well. That was enough. Then he pointed toward a flower bed. "Would you spray there?" I looked at the flowers. "No." He smiled. "Good. The salt in the mixture deserves respect. Salt doesn't simply disappear because the weeds turn brown. It can remain in the soil. That's why he almost never used this mixture where he hoped to grow vegetables or flowers later. Concrete, cracks, gravel, fence lines, those places made sense. Garden beds usually called for different methods. Again, location mattered. Not every weed deserves the same treatment. As we walked back toward the house, he stopped beside the mulch. A tiny grass sprout had just emerged. He bent down, pulled it with 2 fingers. Done. 5 seconds. Then he looked at me. That tiny weed hadn't developed deep roots yet. It hadn't dropped seed. It hadn't spread. He explained that most difficult weed jobs begin as easy weed jobs. People simply wait too long. That may have been the biggest lesson of the day. We spent hours fighting weeds we could have removed in seconds a month earlier. He made it a habit to walk the property once each week, not carrying a sprayer, just looking. Tiny weeds in the mulch disappeared with one quick pull. A little grass growing through a crack got handled before it became a thick clump. Those small weekly walks saved far more work than any homemade spray ever did. The spray became a tool, not the strategy. That's an important difference. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped by. He watched us spraying a few driveway cracks and asked, "Does that homemade stuff really work?" My father-in-law answered before I could. It depends. The neighbor looked confused. It depends on whether you're trying to kill weeds or avoid doing yard work. We all laughed. But he was making a serious point. No spray replaces paying attention. No recipe replaces walking your property. No homemade trick replaces handling little problems while they're still little. That's true for weeds. It's also true for fences, roofs, gardens, almost everything around a home. The older I get, the more I realize my father-in-law wasn't teaching me homemade weed killer. He was teaching me observation. Look sooner, act sooner, work less later. The recipe itself is easy to remember. 1 gallon of distilled white vinegar, 1 cup of table salt, about half a table salt, about half a tablespoon of dish soap. Mix gently until the salt dissolves. Wear gloves. Protect your eyes. Choose a calm sunny day. Use cardboard to shield the plants you want to keep. Spray the leaves, not the soil. Expect browning, not miracles. Check the results after a day. Check again after several days. Repeat if necessary for stubborn weeds. And remember where you're using it. Driveway cracks, gravel, sidewalk seams, places where no plants belong. Not your vegetable garden. Not the middle of your lawn. Not next to flowers you hope will still be there tomorrow. Those simple choices matter more than the recipe itself. If there's one thing I carried away from that afternoon, it wasn't the vinegar. It wasn't the salt. It wasn't even the sprayer. It was something my father-in-law said while putting everything back on the shelf. A weed is easiest to remove the day you first notice it. I found that advice works surprisingly well outside the garden too. Now I'm curious. Where do weeds give you the most trouble? The driveway, the gravel path, around the mailbox? Or is there one crack in the sidewalk that seems to grow the same stubborn plant every single summer? I'd like to hear about it, because if my father-in-law taught me anything, it's that small problems have a funny way of becoming big ones if we keep walking past them.